Welcome back, everybody, to the California Small Farm Conference. We are very excited to have you here today for a workshop we're calling A Farmer's Guide to Groundwater and SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. If that's the workshop you're looking for, you are in the right place. We've got some wonderful panelists and experts and farmers who are here to generously offer their perspective, their time, their expertise. So huge thank you to all of you for being here. And just want to encourage those out there watching to interact with us using the features at the bottom of your screen here. You'll see a little chat function where you can introduce yourself, share resources or your own insights. Or there's a Q&A feature as well. If you want to drop in questions for today's panelists, we'll try to make sure we leave some time at the end of the workshop so that they can answer your questions. So I encourage you to do that, interact. And with that, I hope you all enjoy this workshop. It is being recorded and will be available for viewing on our YouTube channel over at Community Alliance with Family Farmers. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Catherine. Take it away.
Thanks, Evan. Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Van Dyke. I'm so glad you're here with us today to talk about groundwater. So I work with CAFF. I'm the Deputy Director of Water Policy, and we have a great panel here with us today. We've got Lauren Crotty with the Department of Water Resources, Cheetah Tchudi with TurkeyTail Farm, and also a CAFF contractor for our SGMA work, Sonia Rios with UC ANR, and Robbie Jaffe with Condor's Hope. Unfortunately, Rogelio Ponce, who's also a CAFF contractor and farms at Sun Valley Farm, was unable to join us today. He works in the Salinas Valley, Monterey County, and so I'll try and share a little bit about his work as well. But if you've got specific questions, happy to put you in contact with him directly. So we're going to cover a lot of stuff today. We have these fantastic panelists who are going to talk about lots of different elements of SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, how groundwater is changing in the state of California, and what this might mean for your farm or ranch business. Please feel free to put questions in you've got the Q&A section, the chat. Please feel free to put them in. We'll have Lauren, then Cheetah, then Sonia, then Robbie speak, and we'll have a few minutes to ask them questions, but then we'll have a longer Q&A portion at the end as well. So with that, I think we can dive in and get started, and I'll turn it over to you, Lauren.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me on today. My name is Lauren Crotty. I'm with the Department of Water Resources. I'm an engineering geologist with the department. I currently am working on the underrepresented communities, California tribes and small farmers groundwater technical assistance program that provides a lot of funding to the individuals you see on the panel today. So we're just going to go ahead and give you some information briefly about this program. I appreciate you giving us the time to present to you guys today. All right, so just a really brief overview of the program. We have about 18 million in funding currently. There's about 9 million of that, actually 11.5 million of that is directed specifically to small farmers. This is not a grant program. It is free of charge. We provide technical assistance services and education and outreach to small farmers within SGMA regulated basins, specifically those that are medium, high, and critically overdrafted. And I'm just going to go over what our mission is and just a little bit about kind of the program and some of the resources that we offer. So our mission is to provide all individuals with needs, risk, and vulnerabilities associated with SGMA and some of the impacts associated with the program, with the law. We communicate and engage with communities and provide technical assistance services to them. So we have funded a variety of partners, and including our contractor Dyke, which I'll go over some of the services that they offer. And these partners include the Water Foundation, Community Alliance with Family Farmers, or CAFF, as you're familiar with, University of California Agricultural and Natural Resources, UC Davis School of Law, and SGMA Small Farmer Law Clinic. And there are others that do drinking water and ecological technical assistance, which is community water centers, self-help enterprises, Audubon, and the Nature Conservancy. And like I said, we also have Dyke, which is doing a more boots on the ground services. So we do a variety of outreach materials that are multilingual, and we provide coordination with GSAs, other districts in your communities, resource conservation districts, farm bureaus, agricultural commissioner offices, and community-based organizations. We provide presentations and workshops, and we do coordination on that front. We also do site visits and needs assessments and surveys. and provide graphics and animations depending on what is needed for the community. So the big thing, though, is that all these entities provide a variety of services, and primarily our contractor Dyke does a lot of boots on the ground work for some of the issues that are identified by some of our other partners. Specifically, there's groundwater level monitoring, instrument installation and training, aquifer testing to determine yield and supply, soil moisture monitoring, and groundwater quality testing. As well, they do some well interference analysis, well conditions, video logging, and we also do some well location design and construction work. A variety of these services. This is not a limited list, so I apologize. So if there's something you need, we'd like to get more in depth with you and actually figure out what's the issues going on your property. There are some eligibility criteria, so if you are interested, I encourage you to reach out to one of the partners here on the panel or myself, and I can give you our email here too. But our process is a little interesting. There's no application process. You just need to reach out to one of our partners and we do a needs assessment and we provide a summary of kind of the issues that you're having. And we summarize all of those into a preliminary engineering report. And those can include information with include plans and specs, assistance with permitting, anything that's kind of gets you ready for potential grant funding. And we also provide a list of funding resources for you. So if you have any questions, I know that was really brief and a lot of information in a small window, but please shoot me an email. It's a urcta@water.ca.gov or contact one of the partners you see on the panel today, and we're happy to provide you some information. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Lauren. I'll give a few seconds to see if anyone puts a specific question into the Q&A. We've got one from San Diego. Avocado farmers are facing extinction over the highest cost of water in the state at $2,600 an acre foot. The prices we are forced to accept for our fruit is not enough due to cheap imports flooding the market during our growing season. We've spent $28,000 to dig a dry well. Are there any programs available specifically for San Diego growers who don't have a well yet?
You know, Jennifer, I would really appreciate you reaching out to our program. While we may not specifically have funding resources available to help, we do have a variety of connections, and we can find those individuals that might have programs that will be that could be helpful for you. So please send me an email, and we can kind of get you connected with somebody that might have that information.
Yeah, I can put contact details into the chat as well so that, everyone can have access to those. One thing that is tricky is that, California has a number of different water issues, and today we're just focusing on groundwater in these high and medium priority basins, which is kind of a constraint. But yeah, happy to chat more about your specific question. Another question here, and then we'll do more later in the panel, is can you explain how you work with our local water boards on regulations, etc.?
So the URCTA program, we are not, unfortunately, regulators here in this circumstance. We want to provide resources to those that are affected by SGMA, and we rely, and the information that we kind of gather when we're helping these individuals, we try to provide to the other local agencies, as well as some of the larger state agencies that we are partnering with. We can't make decisions, we can't fix problems unless we really know them and are able to kind of identify the issues as we're in person. I hope that answers your question. That's kind of all I can really help with today, though. But yes, please send me an email and I'm happy to provide additional information.
Yeah, one thing that I think is often really confusing when it comes to SGMA and talking about groundwater is that there's not one rule or one way that it works all over the state. We have what's called local control, which Cheetah will explain, but if there's one takeaway you have is that it looks really different depending on where you are in the state. And that's part of why we have this big outreach effort with local people all over, because it's so specific. Okay, I'm just going to have one more question because I think it's a good one. Do you have resources to help people who don't already own land but want to buy land? How can a new farmer assess the water situation on a parcel before purchase? And this is something, oh yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
No, go ahead.
Just going to say that this is something that you can, so Sonia and Cheetah are going to talk about more of what this means, how you figure out what the water situation is like, how you get in touch with resources as you're looking at, options if you're looking at a parcel. So it's a really good question and we'll chat more about it. And now I'll turn it over to Cheetah.
Hi, I'm Cheetah. So I'm one of the handful of SGMA contractors that are in the Northern California region. Our capacity is to kind of understand and distill what is going on in Sigma on a regional level, and kind of communicate that to farmers, connect farmers with the Sigma process, but also be a facilitator in getting you some of those technical assistance things that we were just talking about. And we'll circle back to that in a minute, but I think we'll just go ahead and jump in. So, what is SGMA? So it's the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. It was enacted in 2014 as a way for California to try and bring groundwater pumping into balance with the aquifer, with the water available to us in our state. So for a long time here in California, we've had regulations surrounding the surface water, but groundwater is kind of yet to be untouched. And so we're really seeing the major rollout of it now. And so what do we mean by groundwater? So here in this slide, we have this hydrologic cycle. Um, Basically, water enters the system as rainwater or snowpack. It either remains on the surface of the land as surface water or infiltrates into the ground where it becomes groundwater. So when we're talking groundwater, that's what we mean. It's that underground resource of water. So under Sigma, DWRs identified these undesirable results these are the things we're looking to avoid, why we are managing groundwater. So lowering of groundwater levels, here we're talking about the lowering of the aquifer, the lowering of the water table. This is a big problem in my region. Likewise, reduction of groundwater storage. Sometimes when you pump out enough water from an aquifer, it can collapse and you're unable to fill that reservoir back up. That space can be lost to you. Seawater intrusion, by and large, saltwater intrusion is a coastal issue. The less water you have leaving the system, the more saltwater can sneak back into kind of the land and potentially contaminate soils in that way. Degraded quality, this can mean anything from nitrogen plumes from over-fertilization or toxins from industrial resources, but can get into the aquifer and are then very difficult to remove. Land subsidence, this is kind of what we're seeing in the San Joaquin Valley, where you pump enough water out of the aquifer collapses, and you can lose elevation. The land literally sinks below you. And so this is a major issue. And then surface water depletion, this can be a product of perhaps over pumping the aquifer, drawing out too much water from the ground, but also we're observing reduced snowpack. So this can also be a result from that. And so, California is this very diverse state. We have all sorts of things going on. And so there's all sorts of different problems that we all need to address separately. And as such, we've kind of, DWR has broken us up into these different basins or sub-basins. So kind of this local control approach where these individual challenges, the individual problems can be addressed on a regional level. And so in particular, these regions that are designated as medium or high priority are the ones that really have to come into Sigma compliance and develop these plans. And so we're concerned about the rate of overdraft. And so when we say overdraft, that's when the amount of water we pump out of the system does not equal the amount of water that's coming in through natural resources. So Sigma implementation, again, we're talking about this regional level thing now. Zooming in, this is kind of northern Sacramento basins. The goal is reaching what we're calling groundwater sustainability by the year 2040. And so tasked with this, we have these groundwater sustainability agencies. So these are the people responsible for achieving this. And so typically this is composed of a board of supervisors, a GSA staff, often augmented by contractors or consultants that help develop these plans. And then ideally, we also have stakeholder advisory groups so that are composed of local farmers, domestic well users, scientists, all kind of consulting and helping to guide the process, hopefully. And so the Groundwater Sustainability Agency develops what's called a Groundwater Sustainability Plan. And so this is the method, the metrics, and how they're going to implement these things. And so, again, each region has its own individual issues. And so they develop metrics for measuring their success, as well as demand reduction or recharge strategies. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. So We use the term sustainable yield, sustainable groundwater yield. And so this is kind of our best approximation of how much water we can use in a given year. And so sustainable yield is water in, how much water comes in through our above ground streams, rainfall, snowpack, our underground aquifer, and water out, how much water we're pumping out, and that's going out through evapotranspiration or exported through crops, what have you. And so looking at this, Vina is one of the subbasins in my region. We have this estimate that we can use about 233,000 acre feet per year and have sustainable usage. And an acre foot is about 320,000, or excuse me, 325,000 gallons of water, just to give a sense of scale here. And so you can see kind of a couple years of dry years where, we are getting less rainfall. We're pumping more because the ground is dry and it's hot. And so we're hitting areas of overdraft. Those are those brown columns you see there. And then in wet years, we come into compliance. We're getting more of that sustainable yield under control and keeping more water in our system. So I was reluctant to include this, but I think it's useful. So sustainable yield, that's kind of our best guess, our conceptual look at, how much water we can, successfully pump out of the system and remain in a sustainable, field in the range of sustainability. How do we measure this exactly? So for example, like we have a network of monitoring wells in Butte County. They're regularly sampled to see where the water levels are in terms of the actual water table. And then we also have things like rain gauges and stream gauges, which kind of measure the amount of water coming into the system in those forms. So these can be really confusing, these hydrographs, but suffices to say, this brown line at the top, that's the surface of the land. So this is where your wellhead is basically. The zigzagging line here is the water table. And so, water high point, that's going to be winter, water low point, that's going to be summer. And at the bottom here, we're going across the year. So starting in 2020, and the data is good about up till 2021, it looks like. And so what we're seeing here is that, we're basically 10 feet below surface level to start with. And then over the years, our water table has descended. So here, if my well is only at 20 feet, here I'm running dry. And so that's kind of the take home from that. We have these two terms that are frequently used in Sigma, measurable objectives. So basically, our goal is to hit, that sustainable level by 2040. And we're saying, this is our baseline point. This is what we're trying to hit. So they're trying to kind of negotiate this downward trend and hopefully level this line out by 2040. And then at the bottom here, these are what we call our minimum thresholds. If we have too many wells that are reaching these minimum thresholds, that means we're not coming into Sigma compliance, and that's where DWR can potentially step in. Hopefully that makes sense. I know these are kind of tough. So again, it's going to be different for your different regions. There's so many different things I've seen taking on form in different regions. And so we have the monitoring aspect where we're seeing if we're being successful, but then on the other end of things, we can't continue to do business as usual. And so some things need to change. And so for some regions, it's going to be implementing precision irrigation or retrofitting farmers' pumps so they can utilize more surface water and less groundwater. We want to manage floodwaters and use those instead of being a problem, use them as a tactic for increasing recharge. Again, getting that water back underground where we need it and can store it properly. In my region, there's discussion of telemetry, which is basically moisture sensors in the soil. There's also talk of remote sensing, which is this satellite monitoring to determine water use across a region. There's these really kind of interesting electromagnetic airborne sensing where they do these flyovers with helicopters and are able to see opportunities for recharge in the soil. So basically, the bright colors here are loose and open soils that are capable of absorbing water, and then the dark colors are confined, restricted areas that are not capable. And so using this technology to find regions, areas in your land, in your subbasin that are capable of absorbing the water and keeping it down there. And so it's going to take a diversity of strategies across these regions to make this all happen, and every region is different. So this is my area. I live in Butte County, right about here. So we've got this really interesting hydrogeology going on here. We're kind of the corridor to the Sierra Nevada mountains up here in the upper right-hand corner. So water comes in as snowpack, recharges as it passes into the basin, and then here we hit the valley floor, and then we're hemmed in on this other side by the Sacramento River. And so again, a lot of different things going on. So here, this is the Vina Subbasin. We're a highly agricultural dependent community. This is all a lot of orchards in here, a lot of walnuts, a lot of almonds. So, you know, fixed demand crops that can't be fallowed. We are totally reliant on groundwater here. And so a couple of the challenges going on with us is that we can't supplant surface water for groundwater, and we have to really work on demand reduction strategies. And this region historically has exported about 20,000 acre feet of water per year. That, you know, so 20,000 acre feet of water lost from our aquifer every year. And to give you a sense, that's about 6 billion gallons of water for the last 20 years. Moving south, this is the Wyandotte Creek subbasin. So very different geology, different land use. There is some orchard, but it's a lot of dry land farming, so a lot of cattle ranching as well. It's a relatively stable basin, medium priority, but there is also aspects that are unique in that we've got areas that suffer from pretty bad flooding at the same time. The same regions are having dry wells, somewhat paradoxically. And so they're looking at some conjunctive use and trying to use some of that surface water to get recharge in other areas that are more accepting of that water. And then also another interesting aspect of this region is if you drill deep enough, you can hit pockets of this ancient paleo water. So basically it's saltwater intrusion from the lower strata of the soil. And it's much more an issue for south in the Sutter Buttes area. And then lastly, we have the Butte Basin. Again, very different animal. It's composed of 11 different GSAs across 2 counties. And so that's kind of unique to that aspect. Again, we got the Sacramento River on that side. We got Butte Creek coming down it. So they're able to access a lot more surface water. And so again, relatively stable, only 26% of their water supply is from groundwater. But in drought years, when they have curtailment, when their surface allocations are cut, they can use as much as 50% groundwater. Catherine, am I doing okay on time still?
Yeah, you're great.
Okay. So yeah, CAFF and UC ANR, you know, got these great programs to try and get support to farmers. And that's, you know, a lot of us here at CAFF are really fired up about working with farmers directly to get you the support you need in this new era. And, you know, we will have limitations, but we want to connect you with DUDEC. You know, we can do aquifer assessment, well sounding, pump health. The video logging they mentioned is sending a camera down your well so you can get a look at exactly what's going on underneath your farm. In addition, CAFF has its own kind of pocket of funding to help implement some water reducing practices on farm. So if there's an irrigation efficiency idea that you have in your mind, like please reach out to us because we really want to get the help out there. Likewise, we're, you know, trying to understand what's happening with these GSAs as they develop. Each GSA is kind of in its own time frame. You know, some of them are still getting their GSPs submitted, and others are farther along in the process and already working on demand reduction and recharge. And so it's our job to make sure that we understand this and get that information to you. So yes, we're very much eager to make this all happen. And I really encourage you to reach out because we can get you to some great resources, I feel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cheetah. And if you're someone who's out there thinking, oh man, there's a lot of acronyms, this is pretty confusing. What do you mean there are 11 different groundwater sustainability agencies that make up one sub-basin, which is part of multiple sub-basins in this county? just to say like, yeah, you're right. It's really confusing. And this is why DWR is funding all this work for UC ANR and CAFF to be doing a ton of outreach and education because it is really confusing. And I think the examples that we'll go into will highlight some of the twists and turns that can happen within the SGMA process. Before I turn over to Sonia, I want to see if we've got any questions. Someone writes in, when an entity has pre-1914 water rights, then how does that affect SGMA implementation?
I would think it's kind of separate. So again, the surface water rights and groundwater rights are kind of separate things going on. And so it's been kind of interesting to see, at a Glenn County meeting, and they were talking about securing additional water rights for recharge opportunities. And they were kind of slowly coming to the realization that there's other people purchasing those water rights at the same time. And so there's that, I forget the term exactly. It's like first to apply, first to write. And so, uh, yeah, I can't speak to surface water rights as much, but they are kind of separate things.
Yeah, well said, Cheetah. I think that's another like fairly confusing element of all this is that California has like a pretty well-developed system of managing those surface water rights. And even though, of course, we know that surface and groundwater flow between each other, we have kind of a legal fiction that they're separate and are managed separately. And so, yeah, that's another sort of confusing element of this. Someone else writes in, we have a couple of year-round springs on our property. Are we regulated by the water entity?
So it's this interesting aspect that an individual pumper, an individual well is not going to be regulated. They're managing it as a region. And so going back to that monitoring well, we're taking all these samples from these monitoring wells around the county, and we're saying, okay, we have general aquifer health. What that doesn't take into consideration is if you have a very shallow well next to somebody that has a very deep well and they can pump more aggressively than you and potentially temporarily offset the water table in their direction even. So your spring is not really covered under SGMA. And unless, again, unless the GSA is not properly implemented, then DWR won't be involved. And that's some of what's going on down south is DWR, has had some involvement where needed, and that's where monitoring well meters get put on individual personal wells. So it's a very different thing. So your spring's not affected at this time.
Yeah, this is where I think it's like the local circumstances really play a big role. So definitely encourage you, depending on where you are, to reach out to either CAFF or UC ANR, because right there are some places in the state where there are water allocations. There are some, and so you're only supposed to be using a certain amount, and you're getting fees if you're above it. There are other places where that's not even on the table, and that's really far from the conversation. Um, and I'm sure Sonia will be able to get into this a little bit as well. Um, and then someone else asks, which areas of California do you think are the best position for the future in terms of groundwater for small farms?
I don't know if I can speak to that. Like I met with a hydrogeologist just the other day in my own region, and it is so complex just in this tiny little, county that not one thing can be said about it. We have what feels like abundant water in the north, but we're experiencing dry wells, 30 minutes away. And so, you know, um, that's when reach out to us because we can connect you. Like Groundwater Live has some really great resources. Like we're map geeks and we'd be happy to talk it through. But it is case by case, I would say.
Yeah, I don't know if any of our other panelists want to jump in on that too, because it's an interesting question.
I would agree with that comment. It's each there's not a one size fits all for the state. Every place has its own unique set of circumstances, and honestly, you just have to really get into the weeds, site specific too, about what their situation is like as it is on farm, I think.
We've got one last question, which is if you want to build a small pond on your property, do you have to get permits to create surface water storage?
I think that's a fish and game question. Yeah, California's weird about rainfall water.
Yeah, that's something I know less about, but again, please reach out to us and we'll be happy to help you dig into it and figure out the right way forward.
Yeah, I
Thank
kind of read into that in one of the GSAs in Southern California in the Coachella Desert that you are required to have a permit in Riverside County in that particular basin. So, like I said, just like Cheetah was mentioning, it varies from basin to basin, from county to county, from region to region. They're just all completely different. But just off the top of my head, I did read into that, and it just happens that in Southern California, Riverside County, in that particular basin, they do require a permit. So it varies.
Thanks, Sonia. And I think with that, we'll turn it over to you for your portion of the presentation.
All right. Okay. Okay, so today I will be talking about pretty much similar to what Cheetah was talking about, but what can UC ANR do for these basins? And my name is Sonia Rios. I am the community education specialist in Southern California. I'm the counties that I will be helping will be Riverside and San Bernardino. Well, not necessarily helping, but I will be in charge of. But I can answer any questions in the other counties as well, or help direct them. We've been in this position. There's 4 of us, and we've been in this position for about 3 weeks now, almost a full month. So we're just getting started on getting our programs together, getting our outreach things together, getting needs assessments. So we're still particularly green, but we do have goals and plans to get moving and get these resources out to the growers. So UC ANR received the grant from DWR and URCTA. Once again, just like Cheetah said, we're dealing with the high and medium priority basins in these 2 particular counties. We have created a statewide team providing technical assistance to small farms that need to put in SGMA implementations to their areas. And we are part of the Small Farms Network. So we are just like a little piece of the Small Farms Network that UC has. And as technical assistants, we target our small scale farmers. We provide any technical assistance that we can help with, and we also provide any recommendations or any type of help in other areas. We refer them to different programs as well. Like, for example, in Riverside County, we have like a small farm hub where it's myself, which is SGMA, and then we have a CUSPS gal. She's a SRA that works with the farm advisor down there. We also have our farm advisor hung. And then we also have Maddie, who also works in our marketing and food safety program. So we're very fortunate enough to have all 3 of us there in the same place. But like I said, again, we're pretty much doing the extension part of it, help with the policies, and we want to try to help the growers and the regions with as much to go into the implementations with ease. So we do have a supervisor. There's supposed to be 5 of us, but one of the positions is currently being recruited as we speak. So hopefully we'll have our 5th person in that region, which is near the coast area. So like I said, we will be working with other small farm network programs. We'll be working with the farm advisors, and then we hope to also collaborate with other agencies like NRCS, like we're doing with CAFF, and we want to bring out those workshops, and we also want to bring together for all of us to help this happen. Because from what I understand, it took a decade to get to where we're at right now. And like Cheetah mentioned, every basin is at a complete different place. Like you have some that are already implementing their second or third project. We have Coachella, the Coachella Basin, which is actually an alternative plan, which is the only alternative plan we have in Southern California. I will explain that in a bit. But this is who we are. We have Jaron, who's in the northern San Joaquin Valley. We have Eric Rodriguez in the central San Joaquin Valley. As you see, we have that vacant person that's on the coast. We have Luis, who's in the southern San Joaquin Valley. We have like that Bakersfield area. We have like Tulare County, Kings County, which is actually severely critical right now. And then I'm down here all by myself in Southern California. I was fortunate enough that I live in Southern California. I've been here for almost a decade and a half, and I was a farm advisor in my previous position, but this was my territory. So I'm very familiar. I'm very grateful that I at least have some resources ready for me. So when I do get into full groove, we can help get this started for the growers. And then we have Godu, who is our fearless leader with our group. And she's the one that is currently in the process of hiring that vacant position. So as you can see, our map's a little bit different than the CAFF. They have most of the northern coastal area. That's where they're located, as we're distributed down the San Joaquin Valley and down in Southern California as well. Okay, so what will we be doing exactly? Like I said, we'll be visiting farms to provide technical assistance because every basin is completely different. Every region is completely different. So pretty much we need to help with what they need, whether it's implementing or pretty much keeping them on track to keep an eye on something that might change throughout the future. We are developing materials in different languages. For instance, I'm going to be providing in Spanish and in English. For these small growers, we will be conducting outreach activities and workshops and field days. This is where we will be collaborating with different government agencies. And then pretty much our job is also to review these GSPs, get to know them front and back. We also will be facilitating access to resources available from nonprofits and private sector partners, kind of what Lauren was talking about, as well as Cheetah. They did mention some of those as well. We will be attending meetings of local groundwater sustainability agencies, which, by the way, I have one tonight, and we'll be sitting on there. And pretty much what we're going to be doing is becoming the liaison for the growers. We want to relay whatever's happening in that boardroom and also be the voice of the growers, because we are the boots on the ground. We are the ones that are finding out exactly what is happening in the field and make sure that people that are making the decisions and in the boardrooms are on board on what's really happening. So when we start getting into reviewing the groundwater GSPs, like I said, we need to become very familiar with them because everyone is completely different. Luckily, I don't have any critical basins in my area. I do have a couple of low priorities, but like I said, we're not going to really touch on those, but I will still be involved because at any time during this decade of things changing, they might fall into one of those categories. So I think that's what's going to be a little bit confusing too, especially to the growers, is that, hey, you said I wasn't in this critical, and then in year 5 of us doing stuff, we are. So that's why it's always good to be involved in the low priority as well. And then we will be analyzing these management policies to generate recommendations to make sure that the growers are pretty much aware of what is happening and why it is happening. Like I said, we need to make it clear that we're not the ones that will be cracking down on the rules and be snitching and whatnot, but we are there to help them and to make sure that it's an easy process for them because it is very confusing. Like I said, I have San Bernardino and Riverside counties. This is a quick little map of what my basins consist of. In San Bernardino County, I believe I only have 2 basins, but only one is critical, and that's near the Yucaipa area, Oak Glen area. And from what I understand, their GSP is also a little bit different than the rest of the GSPs that I have in my area. And then we have the Banning, Beaumont Pass area. Then we have the Cathedral City, Palm Desert, Indio, pretty much anything north of the Salton Sea. Then we have the San Jacinto area, which is the Hemet, Moreno Valley, Menifee, Paris. And then we have the Elsinore, which is pretty much, I believe it's Lake Elsinore, and I can't think of the other town that's there, but parts of Murrieta of the north part, because for some reason Murrieta seems to be growing into that area. So we'll probably find some residents in Murrieta land into these GSPs. And then we have the Corona, Norco, which is more of the west part of the county. So here is a list of all of the basins that I will be helping the growers in. And like I said, it's very interesting that my Coachella Valley Basin is an alternative plan. So what that means is that during the process about a decade ago, when they were deciding, hey, we need to create these agencies to make a plan, Coachella was pretty much like, hey, we've actually been doing this for a while. And the more I looked into the history, they've actually been monitoring their water and making sure that the groundwater is not being depleted since 1910. So they're one of the few that have actually been in action with these type of plans already. So when it came time to submit their DSPs, they're like, hey, we're going to turn in an alternate plan instead. And it was approved. And I think the only difference is that they have to submit their plan with the data supporting that they have been conducting that type of water savings, I think once every 5 years with that data. And I think that's kind of unique, and it's just amazing the stuff that they've done the last decade. And I know for sure that Coachella Valley might be one of the only ones that actually require all their growers to have meters on their farms. And I have in San Bernardino, I have the Yucaipa, which I already spoke about. Then we have the Bear Valley, which is actually in the low, just because they're in the mountains and they get most of the groundwater delivered to them because they're in the mountains where it actually snows. And then I also have the East Riverside area, which is known as the Greenbelt. And they're doing okay, but they also have a lot of caveats and a lot of water rights and a lot of those things going on, because it's actually quite complicated because it's technically the old town Riverside that's there. But besides that, most of the other ones are still in implementation of their phase 1. And most of these folks only meet once a quarter. So once every 4 months. And we just missed all the January meetings, unfortunately. So we're going to be on board for hopefully the March and April meetings for that. And if you guys have any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Sonia. We have one question, which is, who services San Diego County, and can I get their contact info?
Okay. So in San Diego, unfortunately, we do not have a Sigma person there. Um, it depends on the questions what they have. Like I said, I can help like verbally, but when it comes down to any of the resources, for like Dudek and anything else, me physically going over there, I can't, because I have to stay within my territory, but I can help over the phone and we can discuss and talk, and then maybe I can help with resources from a different agency.
Yeah, and that's partially because there aren't high and medium priority basins in San Diego, right? Because this is all based on where the groundwater is like kind of the most dire.
Yeah.
And so we have someone else saying, what makes for a high risk priority rating? Is future warming and loss of snowpack included in that rating?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it is. So pretty much what when they created this about 10 years ago, they wanted they pretty much asked for like that data and that research. I don't know exactly, maybe Lauren could probably tell how exactly how they came up with the priority basins. I'm guessing just based on like data that they've been collecting. And they are the ones that determined which basins are considered critically, but I don't know what that range is. But pretty much it does, there's all these factors that are that are put in to what makes a basin a certain rating.
Yeah, if you want to reach out, send us an email. I can go the URCTA email. I can get you in contact with the methodology and the process. There's a lot of aspects that go along with it. There's a lot of little pieces of information that affect that priority rating. But please send us the information, and I can actually get you in contact with those that have a little bit more in-depth information on how DWR did identify the basins that are medium, high, and uncritically overdraft.
Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah, my understanding is that it's also a combination of like how many people or things are reliant on that groundwater, the percentage of groundwater versus surface water, right? So Cheetah showed you sort of different areas, like the really high priority is where groundwater makes up most of that water source. And then the like amount of negative impacts that are happening. So if there's a high amount of subsidence where that land is falling, if there's a high amount of seawater intrusion, those things all go to kicking up to that higher priority level.
That's correct. Yeah.
We have someone else asking, what are the differences and similarities of technical services provided by CAFF and UC ANR?
We're actually the same. We're just in different parts of the state. So like I mentioned, CAFF has up north and most of the coast, whereas UC has the Central Valley as well as that small hub of Southern California that I have. We overlap and collaborate and communicate a lot. So if one of us can't figure out something, then, CAF can and whatnot. So like I said, we all have the same goal, is to help out these small growers get through this next 10 years to make sure nobody gets fined, nobody gets in trouble, and we really need to stay on top of taking care of this water problem. So we're all the same.
Yeah, well said. Sonia mentioned Godo briefly, who's sort of my equivalent at UCANR, and she's amazing and is an incredible resource. So yeah,
Yes, amazing.
yeah.
She knows a lot about the state's water.
Totally. Yeah, we're really lucky to be working together. And then the other team member we haven't really talked about is the UC Davis Legal Clinic, which Robbie will chat about a little bit, which is also like such an important key part of this wider outreach effort. So Robbie, will turn it over to you, and I'll go ahead and share those slides for you.
Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Robbie Jaffe. I'm a small scale farmer in the Cuyama Valley. We farm wine grapes and have olive trees using dry farming methodology. So we consider ourselves extremely sustainable. And just as a introduction, I've been involved with Sigma since its start. The Cuyama Valley is one of 21 identified critically overdrafted basins. You can see we're located, I don't know if this will show, we're located right here, sort of, we're a long, narrow, somewhat small basin running east-west, sort of coming out of the southern San Joaquin and heading toward the coast. We're actually in the jurisdiction of 4 counties. Santa Barbara is the largest land piece, San Luis Obispo, Ventura, and Kern. And I want to just say that in terms of being involved with SGMA over these past 10 years, I look at SGMA as a really big and very important experiment taking place in California. And there's, it's the first time that California has made any effort, had any legislation to guide the management of our groundwater, which is critically important to not only growing food, but the survival of communities and having access to good, clean groundwater. So it's extremely important. And I think we being the collective, we have learned a lot. And I want to really, in a way, do a little bit of a shout out to DWR, who has been, in our situation, Cuyama situation, extremely responsive. And I'll get into the nitty gritty of that in a moment. And also to realize that as SGMA was implemented, there are glitches in it. And one of those extremely significant glitches is that the small pumper and the small farmer aren't really addressed in any kind of equitable way. And I see the program that Lauren's talking about within DWR. IRCDA is providing technical assistance to the small scale farmers, the small pumpers, is extremely important as we try to balance out what SGMA is all about. So what I'm going to talk about is sort of what's happening on the ground, and this case study is basically of the Cuyama Basin. It's a very small basin, probably less than 2,000 people. It's a very disadvantaged basin, has 3 disadvantaged communities within it. It's a very dry basin. It only gets 6 to 15 inches of average rainfall. We're completely groundwater dependent. We used to have a river that had surface water. That's been pumped down. We no longer have any surface water and completely depend on the water that's pumped out. We're a very sort of beautiful special area where Carrizo Plain is to our north and the Los Padres National Forest is to our south. So next slide, please, Catherine. So the question becomes is why are we a critically overdrafted basin? And ultimately we need to go back to, well, who is farming in Cuyama? Because it's agriculture that has overdrafted our basin. And I've divided into sort of 3 categories. And within those categories, there's, of course, more subgroupings. But basically, we have large corporate growers in the basin who are basically in there to farm the land, extract the water and the crop, and really do not contribute anything back to the community. And we have the 2 largest carrot growers in the world, Grimway and Bolthouse, who are now both controlled by hedge funds, farming there, and they're the largest pumpers in the basin. They're pumping 70% of the water in the basin. So if they weren't pumping, we would have basically no issues. We would be a sustainable basin. And then we have, I think many of you might be familiar with the next picture, Harvard Management Corporation. And Harvard has invested, and they've done this in several other counties in California, and they've done this worldwide, where they go in and invest in land at relatively inexpensive cost, and then they add infrastructure, and then usually what they try to do is sell it off. Well, in 2012, they bought 10,000 acres of dry rangeland that had no irrigation on it. And they started installing an intensive wine grape vineyard. And our thinking about it was their intention was to be able to develop it and then sell it at vineyard prices. but I think they got a little bit stopped by SGMA, and instead of developing, they've put in about 1,000 acres of vineyard grapes, but in a region of the Cuyama Basin that has just always been dry rangeland, non-irrigated rangeland, or dry farmed. And so for the first time, the western area of the Cuyama Basin, because of the vineyard they have put in, is trending down in terms of its groundwater level. And then there are the medium-sized pumpers and small-scale pumpers who are local, who live there, who care about the community, who give back to the community. And there's a lot of pistachios grown there, but it's fairly small acreage, all with a lot of water conservation practices in place. And then there are other smaller scale farmers, similar to us, who are dry farming or de minimis users. Next slide. So there's about 10% of our basin is irrigated, about 16,000 acres. And you can see, and Cheetah mentioned, sort of talked about overdraft. It's when more is pumped out that comes in. So just in 1 year, water year 2021, we were overdrafting by 40,000 acre feet. And that's a tremendous amount. And when you think most of that is going to the large carrot growers, it's just quite astounding how it's pushed us into this really difficult situation where the people living in the Cuyama Basin are not sure how we're going to maintain our lives or our communities. Next slide. So this is once you get into this, if you dive into it, you're going to get to learn how to read hydrographs. They become a key. The monitoring networks are really key in all of the basins that are developing groundwater sustainability plans. And we, as one of the critically overdrafted ones, were required to have our first plan submitted to DWR in 2020. And we've now just submitted a revised plan. But this is just, you could see the downward trend in both of these wells. The well on the left side of the screen, well number 420, that's a well in a monitoring well in the carrot growing area. And I think Cheetah mentioned, so the green line is where you want to be. That's your measurable objective. The red line is where you do not want to go below. That's your minimum threshold. That's what part of the guidelines for your groundwater sustainability plan are monitoring, and want to make sure that wells are not going beyond the identified minimum threshold. And here you can see where, in this case, the carrot well, the area in the carrot well is just continuing down. And similarly, on the right, well 841, which that's a monitoring well in Harvard's vineyard. And so you could see in 2015, when they just put irrigation wells in there, that area was pretty close to surface level. And it's been trending down. It's gone down over 100 feet. What's very interesting is what happens in the in-between. So the drawing of those lines where the measurable objective is set, where the minimum threshold is set, is done by the GSA, your local groundwater sustainability agency. And depending who's sitting on that agency, what the voting structure is, how the different lobbying takes place, the setting of those thresholds can be very arbitrary. And in this case, Harvard's soil hydrologist basically went in and lobbied the board to have the minimum threshold set way down low, so they can actually create this cone of depression where there's been none before, and have a long way to pump down before they're going to raise any red flags. And this type of thing, and I think that's part of the story that I share from Cuyama, is that while there's all this potential for good, healthy groundwater management, it still falls within a lot of the maneuverings by those who have power on the local GSA. And in Cuyama's case, Grimway and Bolthouse have very key seats on our GSA and control a lot of what happens. Next slide, please. So basic history with Cuyama, we submitted our groundwater sustainability plan in January 2020, and we made, the community has been fairly well organized. We do have a standing advisory committee. I've been on that since its inception in, I think, 2017. And there were a lot of concerns we had about the GSP that was submitted, and we got engagement from other agencies and nonprofits like Nature Conservancy to help us in writing letters to DWR about our concerns. And I want to just say this, to where I have felt the most heard as I've been involved in this has not been by the local agency. Where I have felt most heard and where I think our community is most heard is when we engage with DWR. Cuyama is part of the Southern Office of DWR, and we've had communication with them regularly. They've listened to us. They've listened to our input. We wrote we had a lot of letter writing about our concerns on the GSP and presented it in ways it's really important to present our concerns with scientific data to back it up, so they have something very authentic to look at. And we felt well responded to. The DWR found the initial plan incomplete, was resubmitted and then approved, and is currently being implemented, and it has all sorts of flaws in it that we're still working on, and we're still trying. And a key flaw is that the small pumpers voice and situation is not really heard in that GSP. So as cutbacks start to happen, the small farmer is going to be hurt a lot more than the large pumper. The small scale farmers are in some cases really close to getting pushed out of business, whereas the large pumpers in proportion are, still have a lot of water to pump because it's determined based on historical use. So those who have overpumped our basin are getting rewarded by not having to cut back to the same percentage or degree that a small scale pumper is having to cut back. Next slide. But even so, and here's where the complication steps up. And one of my concerns in sharing this story is I think it's going to be something we see happen more and more throughout the state. So what happened, I mentioned Grimway and Bolthouse have seats on our Groundwater Sustainability Agency. They were involved in approving the plan that was submitted, but they at some point along the line decided they didn't like the plan, and they filed what's called an adjudication. And an adjudication, as someone brought up the conversation around water rights earlier, water rights are written into our state's constitution. They date back to the legal framework of the forming of California. And an adjudication is basically when plaintiff, someone involved, takes the water management of a basin to the courts, and the courts get to make the decision around allocation and in basis, it's like, so we have these two parallel things happening in Cuyama right now. One is the SGMA process, and the other is this court directive adjudication process. And what happens with adjudication, I think you could go to the next slide, Catherine. Yeah, so this sort of compares SGMA and adjudication. So what happens is SGMA is basically a public process. You have public meetings, you have ways to have public input, DWR goes through a thorough review of any plan, and you have input into the review of that plan. And it can be modified by future legislation. With the adjudication filed by Grimway and Bolthouse, there's no public input. It's all just through lawyers. And so in order to defend our water rights, no matter how small a pumper, there are people who've been on their land for 5 generations and aren't farming, and they still have to lawyer up just to maintain their water rights. In terms of how the court will rule. So you've had people who are just local people who are completely stretched to the max in terms of having to lawyer up or deciding to not be represented or drop out of representation because they can't afford it. And then they risk the judge ruling in such a way where they can lose their water rights, which really affects the value of the land, affects future generations, all sorts of things. And where you saw Cheetah present the different aspects that SGMA's looking at in terms of water quality, impact on the environment, adjudication only looks at what's the most that can be pumped out of the basin and not hurt the overall basin. So it's really confounding and confusing, and actually and quite frightening, especially for the small scale pumpers in our basin. And so this is when we reached out through CAFF and got connected with the program, with the IRCTA program under DWR, and received some we received some funding at the community level to organize the small farmer and rancher network, which is we're bringing together, I like to say all, but as many as possible of the small pumpers to have our voices heard both at SGMA and in the adjudication. And it's been really challenging. It's really important, and it's really, really difficult. And one of our key accomplishments, and this is also connected with the IRCTA program, is we've been able to partner up with two partners, one being the Small Farmer Water Clinic at UC Davis, and the other being Dyke, which provides technical assistance. And it's the first time that the small scale pumpers have those resources, both the legal resources and the technical assistance, to look at what's happening in our basin through the eyes of the small pumpers. And the clinic is helping us figure out legal strategies, both for SGMA and for adjudication. How can we get our voices heard? One example in terms of SGMA, we just went through an allocation process where one of the small scale farmers who hardly pumps any of the most overdrafted region of our basin, and I think it's less than 0.01%, was going to have to cut back on his water supply, which he couldn't possibly do and stay in business. And the clinic was able to help him with the variance process, and he got awarded a temporary variance. And we're hoping that it will open the door for us to get more small scale friendly policies in with SGMA. And similarly with adjudication, Dyke has been looking at the model that's being used to analyze our basin's water use, and looking at it from the small scale perspective, and just showing how the small pumpers are having absolutely no impact on our basin. And if it's the larger scale, the large pumpers that really are the ones that need to be modified in order to bring about change. One of the ways our community's really stepping up is we've, because of the adjudication, called for a boycott of carrots. Now, that's not all carrots. It's Bolthouse and Gourmet carrots, which mainly probably is the baby carrots that you buy in the stores. And so we're actively spreading the word about that. And you can go to the next slide. So we're taking action. We have we're an active community. We show up and we stand together, and we're talking to our local legislators. The network now meets monthly, and both Dudek and the legal clinic are part of those meetings and are shaping plans for how we can get the small farmer voice in. I want to say that even in closing with all of that, I actually just got off of a phone call that several of us, some of the leadership for the network was on the phone with two of our GSA members who are generally supportive of small scale farmers, and they just said, oh, that's nice. They weren't really ready to respond to some of the issues and demands because it's really a paradigm shift. So getting the small scale voice in there is so important, but it's also extremely difficult. And I think I'll wrap up on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Robbie. We've got just 2 minutes. So we have a few things in our Q&A section. Does SGMA just not have teeth in it to stop what's going on in this region? So maybe I can give a brief sort of overview. Basically, you give your plan to DWR. DWR says, yes, that works. It's incomplete. Do some more work. Or it says, inadequate. And then it goes to the State Water Resources Control Board. That is really the backstop. So that's where sort of the teeth come in, and that's where basins are going into probation, which we haven't chatted about that much today. I don't know. Anybody else want to say anything about the idea of SGMA having teeth in it?
I think SGMA potentially has teeth, but it really depends on the GSA, and it really depends on the community getting involved and showing up and taking advantage of the public access that we have through SGMA. So it's extremely important. I personally have been involved with it for over 10 years, and I believe in SGMA. I want SGMA to work, but it really takes a lot of pushback from the community.
Thank you. And then someone else writes in, it seems like facilitating or having legal representation for farmers in areas and a class action may be a good way to protect. And I feel like that's part of what the legal clinic's getting at.
Yeah, I think the legal clinic is they're in their first year, and they're getting their feet on the ground, figuring out. I mean, the clinic has great leadership and has a group of third-year law students involved with it. So they're doing really great work. And I think we'll see different kinds of things coming out of it over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Someone else writes, doesn't the adjudication have to take SGMA into account?
Nope. No is the simple answer. It's actually more complicated than that. There was some legislation post SGMA that said the court does need to review SGMA and take it into account, but it's advisory more than anything.
And with that, we are at 12:45. Someone else says, can you pump large amounts of surface water into groundwater for storage? There's a number of groundwater recharge projects happening around the state, and reach out to us if you want to learn more about what that looks like. So thank you so much to our panelists. You all did a great job. Thank you to everyone for being such great participants, great questions, and just really appreciate y'all being here with us. Please do reach out, since as you can tell, we love nerding out on groundwater and we want to do it with you.